Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the spring series of Books Sandwiched In, a program sponsored by the Friends of the Library. This is our 41st year of doing Books Sandwiched In. That's a pretty amazing accomplishment. My name is Beth Stitch and I'm a member of the Books Sandwiched In committee. We are so glad to be back here and without masks, and we'll just keep our fingers crossed that things continue to improve in the COVID department. Today's reviewer is Richard Beatty. He is also a member of the Books Sandwiched In committee, and I think you've been on the committee about 10 years now, Richard? Okay. He will be reviewing the Anthropocene Reviewed, Essays on a Human-Centered Planet by John Greene. I actually got the pronunciation of that word correct. I'm so proud. So a little bit about Richard. He has been living in Batavia for 23 years. He retired from the New York State Office of Real Property Services in 2010. He and his life partner, Rayanne Engler, live on Summit Street in a home that they've spent many years renovating and updating, and I think it still continues to this day. They were recognized for their efforts as the 2005 Homeowners of the Year. Maybe you could be up for that award again.
No more awards.
Richard is also an active member in the Summit Street Association, which is a neighborhood group seeking to promote the livability of the street by encouraging residents and landlords to work together to create a better place to call home. In his spare time, he's a senior docent at the Darwin Martin House in Buffalo. And most mornings, Richard can be found at the Pub Hub Coffee on Harvester Avenue, enjoying coffee and conversation with folks in town. You see that's why the door prize is the Pub Hub Coffee today. And he also asked me to include that he is the executive producer of the Brisbane story that will have its world premiere on June 4th. And he also promises that he'll tell us what that is all about. Help me welcome Richard Beatty.
Oh boy, yes, what is the Brisbane story? We'll start with that first. Everybody knows the Brisbane building here in the city. The Brisbane Mansion is now home to the City of Batavia Police Department. Within the next 2 years, that is going to be empty. The city has made known that they are not wishing to be owners of that property in the future. So what is to become of it? A group of us with the Landmark Society got together and decided, hey, let's put on a show. So we have contracted with Derek Maxfield up at the college, and he has written a very entertaining script. I've been to 2 readings. I'll be heading to the reading after this book sandwich and here the 3rd time around. So we'll be performing 3 times. Right now I may change the 4th because guess what happens on June 4th this year? The Muck Dogs opener. I don't know if I want to go up against some Muck Dogs. So we may alter that a little bit. So the 4th, the 11th, and the 15th, there will be at 3 different locations. Details will follow. But enough about that. All right, as you can tell, we have a blank screen. I don't know if anybody was at my Landmark presentation a number of years back where I had similar difficulties. I walked around the room with a laptop showing the people the PowerPoint. I'm not going to do that because I'd probably trip over the cord and I'd end up like Samantha with a busted foot. All right, so the book, as Beth correctly pronounced, and I will try, is John Greene, the Anthropocene. Oh, look at that. It's entitled Essays on a Human-Centered Planet. John Greene is an author of, I guess, primarily young adult fiction. He started out in 2000 with, after a series of, entry-level jobs right out of college. John, right now, I think, is 44 years old. He worked for a time, volunteered, for a time as a chaplain at a hospital, I believe in Chicago, and witnessed very traumatic events. And it changed his mind on what he wanted to do for his life purpose. He was thinking of entering on target to become an Episcopalian priest. He decided, I'm going to do something else. Went to work for Booklist, and Booklist, of course, is the the Library Association, the publication that they put out. He started out doing, menial tasks, proof checking, editing whatever somebody else had written. Came in contact with one of the reviewers, and she took an interest in him, and he ended up doing some spots on NPR, some somewhat humorous spots. Pretty soon he was, book reviewing, and then shortly after that he started his career as a novelist. Now, I'm going to hopefully make this work. There we are. John's first novel won the 2006 Michael Prins Award, presented by the American Library Association. It's called Looking for Alaska. The second novel followed the following year, In Abundance of Catherines, a 2007 Michael Prins Award honor book. In '08, he did Paper Towers, which is a New York Times bestseller, and won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Young Adult Mystery. It was adapted for film in 2015. He also did a book with David Leviathan, Will Grayson. The Fault in Our Stars was 2012, also adapted for film in 2014. And I think that was his biggest hit. And I think it made big money at the box office. I have not seen it. And his last novel was Turtles All the Way Down, and I believe there are negotiations for that becoming a movie as well. After he finished Turtles All the Way Down, he started to have thoughts that maybe he wanted to change directions. John has suffered from OCD in a very debilitating way over his life. And I think most of his novels, I understand, sort of incorporated some of his characteristics. And I think he was becoming afraid that he's being typecast. So he decided, he and his brother, let me see. Let me just read something, because John Greene has a wonderful style of writing and speaking. I'm sorry we won't be able to hear him speak today, but I advise you, after this, go and Google John Greene and listen to one of his podcasts. They're awesome. All right, this is from Turtles All the Way Down, and I believe this is the psychiatrist speaking to the main character about her issues. We're such language-based creatures that to some extent we cannot know what we cannot name, and so we assume it isn't real. We refer to it with catch-all terms like crazy or chronic pain, terms that both ostracize and minimize. The term chronic pain captures nothing of the grinding, ceaseless, inescapable hurt. And the term crazy arrives at us with none of the terror and worry you live with. Nor do either of these terms connote the courage people in such pains exemplify, which is why I'd ask you to frame your mental health around a word other than crazy. All right, John and Hank Greene, his older brother Hank, I believe in 2007 decided this is the 21st century. The internet is very alive with media. They got into putting together a number of podcasts, video presentations posted on the internet. The first of them is listed as the Vlog Brothers because it's a video blog. Crash Course, VidCon, Project for Awesome, Mental Floss on You. There's a difference. Dear Hank and John, and the one we're having here today as their book sandwiched in, the Anthropocene Reviewed. All right. What the heck is Anthropocene? Besides a difficult word to say. All right. John, between January of 2018 and September of 2020, so it carried over into the first 6 months of the COVID pandemic. He reviewed facets of the human condition on a 5-star rating. In other words, every essay at the end gave a star rating. From 1 star, I don't think he had any no stars, but up to 5 stars. When he worked for Book List, they were required to review the book in 175 words, is that? So that the librarians could say, well, that book makes it, that book doesn't make it. Just say real quick, go through it. So he decided he was going to do a little different. He's going to call it a 5-star rating. There are 44 essays. And do we have a count?
We do.
And what is?
There is Diet Dr. Pepper.
Diet Dr. Pepper. Let me
Like
Yeah.
There's a summary.
All right. Diet Dr. Pepper. That's a good one. I like that. I liked all of them. All right. Let me just read you some of the names. You guys have seen them. You're going to hear them again. This is 12 of the 44. Humanity's temporal range, velociraptors, our capacity for wonder, Diet Dr. Pepper, Hall of Presidents, my personal favorite, sunsets, the yips, Googling strangers, Monopoly, whispering, the QWERTY keyboard, and viral meningitis. And in each of these essays, plus the other 32 that he put in this book, he does a very nice job of starting out with a premise, telling a story essentially, lots of great quotes. I don't know what the man's IQ is, it's well above mine, I know that. Very organized individual, great speaking voice. He's got the right amount of humor for the subject matter that he's speaking about and writing about. Now, I'm sorry I don't have the video. So the Anthropocene. Of course, we know that the Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old, and we've been through a number of epochs, and things have changed. You know, the Earth was a dotted space, and it formed, and life gradually, and I do mean gradually, formed. We've been through the Precambrian, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic era, of course, is when the dinosaurs were ruling the Earth, and we know what happened to them. The planet was struck by an asteroid. The planet's climate drastically changed. 75% of life on Earth disappeared, became extinct, and then after that, the Cenozoic era began. We are in the Cenozoic era at this time. We're at the very tail end. Well, we're not at the tail end of it. I hope not. That wouldn't be good. I believe it's called the Heliocene epoch, and that's when humans arrived on the planet. So in the last 20 years or so, scientists and other individuals have decided that we need some sort of name for the era we're living in. We're living in the era when human beings change what's going on the planet. We have the capacity to wipe ourselves out. I mean, obviously, if you grew up in the 50s, you lived under the specter of nuclear war. You could wipe out humanity within a few hours, I guess, with that. But of course, we've changed the planet by expanding our range, by increasing our population, by extracting resources, all the things that humans do. So in the early part of the 2000s, a number of people tried to come up with a definition of Anthropocene. It's an unofficial unit of geologic time used to describe the most recent period in Earth's history when human activity started to have significant impact on the planet's climate and ecosystems. That's according to the National Geographic Society. Merriam-Webster now has it in their dictionary. The period of time during which human activities have had an environmental impact on the Earth regarded as constituting a distinct geologic age. So John decided he was going to do a series of essays along those lines. I highly recommend that you go out on the internet and look up, I think it's his most recent one. He does something called the H of G, which now I can't remember what it means. But everybody know Paul Farmer? Paul Farmer was the gentleman who Partners in Health. John Farmer, of course, was focused primarily in Haiti. Haiti, of course, has had many troubles, both environmental and from political troubles. Farmer and his group have been in Haiti for many years trying to keep the standard of living, raise it up a bit, and try to help those folks in Haiti. John Farmer died, I believe, February 22nd. And John does a really nice tribute to him. So I suggest you look that up on the internet. Great quote, and this I believe is from John Greene himself. Disease does not treat people equally unless society treats people equally. Isn't that the truth? All right.
Say that one again.
Disease does not treat people equally unless society treats people equally. How many people have no insurance, right? You get a disease, tough luck. All right. So, we've had the vote. Diet Dr. Pepper won. Now, this is going to be a trick. Can I read out of a book holding a microphone?
Not gonna hold it for you.
No, I'm kidding. Diet Dr. Pepper. Now, a little bit about John. He tells it quite well in the essay. I will read it, page 69. And again, this is a great book to have by your bedside, especially the large print edition, which Samantha so gratefully had at our meeting. I'm like, wow, large print. I think I'm ready for that. It's great. I can read. All right, Diet Dr. Pepper. This was written, I believe, probably somewhere in 2018. The story of Dr. Pepper begins in 1885 in Waco, Texas, where a pharmacist named Charles Allerton combined 23 syrup flavors to create a new kind of carbonated drink. Notably, Allerton sold the recipe for Dr. Pepper after a few years because he wanted to pursue his passion, the pharmaceutical chemistry. All right. He worked at the drug company Eli Lilly before going back to his hometown to head up the laboratory at Waco Drug Company. Allerton's soda probably would have remained a Texas-only phenomenon. Maybe I will need you, Samantha, or someone.
What did he develop that? What's
All
the
right.
date?
Do we have a stand of any sort? My able assistant, Samantha. All right, Allerton soda probably would have remained a Texas-only phenomenon, eventually disappearing like so many other local soda flavors. The Opera Bouquet, the Swizzle Fizz, the Almond Sponge. Had it not been for the dogged determination of Woodrow Wilson Clemens, who preferred to be called Foots, a nickname he picked up in high school due to his oddly shaped toes. Foots, the youngest of 8 children, grew up in the tiny Alabama town of Wyndham Springs. He got a football scholarship at the University of Alabama, where he was teammates with Bear Bryant. In 1935, when Foots was a senior in college, he started working as a Dr. Pepper salesman. He retired 51 years later as a CEO of a software company worth over $400 million. By 2020, the Keurig Dr. Pepper Corporation, which owns, among many other brands, 7-Up, RC Cola, and 4 different kinds of root beer, is valued at over $40 billion, that's with a B, dollars. Almost all of its products are some form of sweetened and or caffeinated water. Foots Clemens succeeded because he understood precisely what made Dr. Pepper significant. I've always maintained, he said, you cannot tell anyone what Dr. Pepper tastes like because it's so different. It's not an apple, it's not an orange, it's not a strawberry, it's not a root beer, it's not even a cola. Cola, after all, is derived from cola nuts and vanilla, 2 real-world flavors. Sprite has that lemon-lime taste. Purple soda is ostensibly grape flavored, but Dr. Pepper has no natural world analog. In fact, the U.S. trademark courts have tackled this issue, categorizing Dr. Pepper and its knockoff as pepper sodas, even though they contain no pepper. And the pepper in Dr. Pepper refers not to the spice, but either to someone's actual name or else to pep. The feeling that Dr. Pepper supposedly fills you with. It's the only category of soda not named for what it tastes like, which to my mind is precisely why Dr. Pepper marks an interesting and important moment in human history. It was an artificial drink that didn't taste like anything. It wasn't like orange but better, or like lime but sweet. In an interview, Charles Allerton once said that he wanted to create a soda that tasted like the soda fountain in Waco smelled. All of those artificial flavors swirling together in the air. Dr. Pepper is, in its very conception, unnatural, the creation of a chemist. The first 0-calorie version of Dr. Pepper was released in 1962. This initial dietetic Dr. Pepper was a failure. But Diet Dr. Pepper became a huge success when it was reformulated in 1991 with a new artificial sweetener, aspartame or aspartame. I always pronounce that one wrong. Aspartame, that's how Rayanne's mother pronounces it. I like it. It also relaunched with a new advertising slogan, Diet Dr. Pepper. It tastes more like regular Dr. Pepper, which it really does. Coke and Diet Coke are barely recognizable as relatives. If Coke is a golden eagle, Diet Coke is a hummingbird. But Dr. Pepper and Diet Dr. Pepper taste like each other, which is especially interesting since, as Foots Clements points out, neither of them taste like anything else. Now, many people find the artificiality of Diet Dr. Pepper revolting. You often hear people say, there are so many chemicals in it. Of course, there are a lot of chemicals in wine, or coffee, or air. The underlying concern, though, is a sensible one. Diet Dr. Pepper is just so profoundly artificial. But that's why I love it. Diet Dr. Pepper allows me to enjoy a relatively safe taste that was engineered for me. When I drink it, I think of the kids at that soda fountain in Waco, Texas. Most of them rarely knew the pleasures of an ice-cold drink of any kind, and how totally enjoyable those first Dr. Peppers must have been. Every time I drink a Diet Dr. Pepper, I'm newly astonished. Look at what humans can do. They can make an ice-cold, sugary sweet, zero-calorie soda that tastes like everything and also nothing. I don't labor under the delusion that Diet Dr. Pepper is good for me, but in moderation, it is probably not bad for me either. Drinking too much Diet Dr. Pepper can be bad for your teeth and may increase other health risks, but as Dr. Aaron Carroll puts in his book, The Bad Food Bible, there's a potential and likely very real harm from consuming added sugar. There is likely none from artificial sweeteners. So Diet Dr. Pepper probably isn't a health risk for me. And yet, I feel as if I'm committing a sin when I drink Diet Dr. Pepper. Nothing that sweet can be truly virtuous, but it's an exceptionally minor vice, and for whatever reason, I've always felt like I need a vice. I don't know whether this feeling is universal, but I have some way down vibrating part of my subconscious that needs to self-destruct, at least a little bit. In my teens and early 20s, I smoked cigarettes compulsively, 30 or 40 a day. The pleasure of smoking for me wasn't about a buzz. The pleasure came from the jolt of giving in to an unhealthy physical craving, which over time increased my physical cravings, which in turn increased the pleasure of giving in to them. I haven't smoked in more than 15 years, but I don't think I ever quite escaped that cycle. There remains a yearning within my subconscious that cries out for a sacrifice. So I offer up a faint shadow of a proper vice and drink Diet Dr. Pepper, the soda that tastes more like the Anthropocene than any other. After going through dozens of slogans through the decades, Dr. Pepper billed itself as tasting like liquid sunshine, as the pepper picker-upper, as the most original soft drink ever. These days, the company's slogan is more to the point. They call it the one you crave. I give Diet Dr. Pepper 4 stars. One example of the 44. All right, look this one. Hang on, I'll be right with you.
So what do you think the minute we
I don't have my hearing aids in, Sandy. So. That's my secret power. Wait till the end, Sandy. Hang on. All right, where'd it go? The Hall of Presidents. Now, one thing that wasn't in my bio is that I grew up in Florida. I'm the odd person in the room besides Brother David over here. We both grew up on the west coast of Florida long before there existed Disney World. We lived in a swampy mess. We had rattlesnakes all around us, cows, you name it. David and I and my parents went to California in 1958 and again in 1960. And we both went along on the family outing to Disneyland. I have a great shot of the state. You looked awesome. So anyways, something in common with John Greene. John Greene also grew up in Florida. He lived not too far from Kissimmee, Florida. And when he was a young man, he went to Disneyland, or Disney World, and really enjoyed it. As this essay will tell you, a little less love for Disney at this point in his life. The Hall of Presidents. Who has been to the Hall of Presidents at Disney World? All right. best air conditioning ever. I grew up in Orlando, Florida, about 15 miles away from the world's most visited theme park, Walt Disney World's Magic Kingdom. When I was a kid, Orlando was such a tourist city that whenever you flew out of the airport, a message played saying, "We hope you enjoyed your visit." In response, my parents would always sigh, then mutter, "We live here." I first visited the Magic Kingdom in 1981 when I was 4 and it was 10. I loved the park back then. I remember meeting Goofy and allowing myself to believe it was actually Goofy. I remember getting scared on the Snow White ride and feeling big because I could ride Thunder Mountain. And I remember being so tired at the end of the day that I'd fall asleep with my face pressed against the glass of a Volkswagen Rabbit. But then I got older. As a teenager, I began to define myself primarily by what I disliked, and my loathes were legion. I hated children's books, the music of Mariah Carey, suburban architecture, shopping malls, but most of all, I hated Disney World. My friends and I had a word for the artificiality and corporatized fantasy of pop music and theme parks and cheerful movies. We called all of it plastic. The TV show Full House was plastic. The Cure's new stuff was kind of plastic. And Disney World, God, Disney World was so plastic. This period of my life coincided with a terrible blessing. My mother won a community service award, and the award came with 4 free passes, annual passes to Disney. That summer, I was 14, and my family dragged me to Disney World all the time. This period of my life coincided with a terrible blessing. Yes, thank you. I realize I'm probably not garnering much sympathy with my sorrowful tale of getting into Disney World for free dozens of times in one summer, but 14-year-old me hated it. For one thing, Disney World was always hot, and in 1992, I had a semi-religious allegiance to wearing a trench coat, which did not pair well with the pounding and oppressive swamp heat of central Florida summers. He's got that right. The coat was meant to protect me from the world, not the weather, and in that respect it succeeded. Still, I was always sweating, and I must have been quite a sight to my fellow theme park visitors. A rail-thin child with a hunter green coat to my knees, droplets of sweat erupting from every facial pore. But of course, I wanted those people to be freaked out by me, because I was freaked out by them. I was repulsed by the idea that they were giving money to a corporation in order to escape their horrible, miserable lives. They were horrible and miserable in part because our corporate overlords controlled all the means of production. At any rate, I had to survive many long summers at Disney World. I usually started out sitting on a bench near the entrance to the park, scrawling snippets of stories into a yellow pad, legal pad, and then eventually the day would get unbearably warm, and I'd make my way to the Hall of Presidents, which was one of the least crowded and best air-conditioned attractions in the Magic Kingdom. For the remainder of the day, I returned to the Hall of Presidents show over and over, writing in that legal pad all the while. I began the first short story I ever finished while sitting through a Hall of Presidents show. The story was about a crazed anthropologist who kidnaps a family of hunter-gatherers and takes them to Disney World. Here's a footnote. I lost the story shortly after finishing it. In my memory, the story had real promise, and for many years I believed that if I could just find that story, I would discover my next book was already half written, and I'd only have to tighten up the plot a little and expand a few characters. Then a few years back, my dad found a copy of the story and sent it to me. And of course, it's terrible and lacks a single redeeming quality. All right, the Hall of Presidents was an opening day attraction at the Magic Kingdom. Well, I do remember it myself. And it has been a constant presence since the park opened in 1971. In a building modeled after Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the U.S. Constitution was debated, visitors first entered a waiting room which features busts of several presidents and also a bust of the Disney Company's founder, Walt Disney, who is identified as an American original. Since there's almost never a wait for the Hall of Presidents, you soon enter the main theater, whereupon you are told that the attraction is dedicated to the memory of Walt Disney. This always struck me as a bit excessive. not only because Disney's sculpted head appears in the waiting room, but also because the entire park is named after him. After Disney thanks Disney, there's a movie about American history before the screen actually eventually ascends to reveal the stars of the show, life-size animatronic recreations of every American president. The animatronics are at once creepily lifelike and terrifyingly robotic, a proper descent into the uncanny valley. As my daughter, then 4 years old, said when we took her to see the Hall of Presidents, those are not humans. Only a couple of presidents actually speak. Animatronic Abraham Lincoln stands and recites the Gettysburg Address. And since the early 1990s, the animatronic current president has made a speech at the end of the show using their own voice. When visited in 2018, animatronic Donald Trump uttered a few sentences, including, above all, to be an American is to be an optimist, which is just a fundamental misunderstanding of how citizenship gets conferred in nation states. The Hall of Presidents doesn't ignore the various horrors of American history, but it's also an unapologetically patriotic celebration of the U.S. and its presidents. In fact, one of the last lines in the show is, our presidency is no longer just an idea, it is an idea with a proud history. And I would argue it is an idea with a proud history, but it is also an idea with many other histories, a shameful history, an oppressive history, a violent history, among others. One of the challenges of contemporary life for me is determining how those histories can coexist without negating each other. But the Hall of Presidents doesn't really ask them to coexist. Instead, it imagined a triumphalist view of American history. Sure, we had some failures, but thankfully we solved them with our relentless optimism. And just look at us now. Two of the Anthropocene's major institutions are the nation state and the limited liability corporation, both of which are real and powerful, on some level made up. The United States isn't real the way a river is real, nor is Walt Disney, or the Walt Disney Company. They are both ideas we believe in. Yes, the United States has laws and treaties and a constitution and so on, but none of that prevents a country from splitting apart or even disappearing. From the neoclassical architecture that attempts to give the U.S. a sense of permanence to the faces on our money, America has to continually convince its citizens that it is real and good and worthy of allegiance, which is not so different from the work that Walt Disney Company tries to do by revering its founding father and focusing on its rich history. Both the nation and the corporation can only exist if at least some people believe in them. And in that sense, they are really kinds of magic kingdoms. As a teen, I like to imagine what life would be like if we stopped believing in these constructs. What would happen if we abandoned the idea of the U.S. Constitution being the ruling document of our nation, or the idea of nation states altogether? Perhaps it is a symptom of middle age that I now want to imagine better nation states and better regulated corporations, rather than leaving behind these ideas. But we cannot do the hard work of imagining a better world into existence unless we reckon honestly with what governments and corporations want us to believe and why they want us to believe it. Until then, the Hall of Presidents will always feel a little plastic to me. I give it 2 stars. Harvey. Everybody remember the movie Harvey? Yes, indeed. I think this story, out of all the ones that are in this book, really tells a huge amount about John Greene. And I'll read it. Hopefully, if I have to pause or short, I'll shorten it. All right. The movie Harvey stars Jimmy Stewart as Elwood P. Dowd, an alcoholic whose best friend is a 6-foot, 3.5-inch tall, invisible white rabbit named Harvey. Josephine Hall won an Oscar for her portrayal of Elwood's sister Vetta, who struggles with whether to commit Elwood to a sanitarium. The film, based on Mary Chase's Pulitzer Prize-winning play of the same name, was an immediate critical and commercial success when it was released in 1950. But my story of Harvey begins in the early winter of 2001, shortly after I suffered what used to be known as a nervous breakdown. I was working for Booklist magazine and living in the north side of Chicago in a small apartment that until recently I shared with a person I thought I would marry. At the time, I believed our breakup had caused my depression. But now I see that my depression, at least in part, caused the breakup. Regardless, I was alone in what had been our apartment, surrounded by what had been our things, trying to take care of what had been our cat. Susan Sontag wrote that depression is melancholy minus its charms. For me, living with depression was at once utterly boring and absolutely excruciating. Psychic pain overwhelmed me, consuming my thoughts so thoroughly that I no longer had any thoughts, only pain. In Darkness Visible, William Styron's wrenching memoir of depression, he wrote, "What makes a condition intolerable is the foreknowledge that no remedy will come, not in a day, an hour, a month, or a minute. If there is mild relief, one knows that it is only temporary. More pain will follow. It is hopelessness even more than pain that crushes the soul." I find hopelessness to be a kind of pain, one of the worst kinds. For me, finding hope is not some philosophical exercise or sentimental notion. It is a prerequisite for my survival. In the winter of 2001, I had the foreknowledge that no remedy would come, and I was agonizing. I became unable to eat food, so instead I was drinking two 2-liter bottles of Sprite per day, which is approximately the right number of calories to consume, but not an ideal nutritional strategy. I remember coming home from work and lying on the peeling linoleum floor of what had been our kitchen, and looking through the Sprite bottle at the green parabolic rectangle of the kitchen window. I watched the bubbles inside the bottle cling to the bottom, trying to hold on, but inevitably floating up to the top. I thought about how I couldn't think. I felt the pain pressing in on me like it was an atmosphere. All I wanted was to be separated from the pain, to be free from it. Eventually, a day came when I could not pick myself off that linoleum floor. And I spent a very long Sunday thinking about all the ways that the situation might resolve itself. That evening, thank God, I called my parents, and thank God they answered. My parents are busy people with demanding lives who live 1,500 miles away from Chicago, and they were at my apartment within 12 hours of that phone call. A plan quickly formed, and I would leave my job, go home to Florida, get into daily counseling or possibly inpatient treatment. They packed up my apartment, and my ex kindly agreed to take the cat. The only thing left was to quit my job. I loved working at Booklist. I loved my coworkers, and I also knew that my life was in danger. I tearfully told my supervisor that I had to quit. And after giving me a hug as I cried, he told me to talk to the magazine's publisher, Bill Ott. I thought of Bill as a character out of a noir mystery novel. His incisive wit is both thrilling and intimidating. When I went into his office, he was surrounded by proof pages of the magazine, and he didn't look up until I closed the door. I told him that something was wrong with my head, that I hadn't eaten solid foods in a couple of weeks, and that I was quitting to move home to Florida with my parents. He was silent for a long time after I finished. Bill is a master of pauses, and then at last he said, "Nah, why don't you just go home for a few weeks and see how you feel?" And I said, "But you'll need someone to do my job." Again he paused. "Don't take this the wrong way, kid, but I think we'll get by." At one point that afternoon, I started throwing up. Excessive Sprite consumption, maybe. And when I came back to my desk to finish packing up my belongings, there was a note from Bill. I still have it. It reads, "John, I stopped by to say goodbye. Hope all goes well and you're back here in 2 weeks with an appetite that would put a longshoreman to shame. Now, more than ever, watch Harvey, Bill." So for years, Bill had been bothering me to watch Harvey. I steadfastly maintained that black and white movies were universally terrible on account of how the special effects quality is poor and nothing ever happens except people talking. I was back in Orlando where I'd grown up. I felt like such a failure to be there, living with my parents, unable to do much of anything. I felt like I was nothing but a burden. My thoughts whirled and swirled. I couldn't ever think straight. I couldn't concentrate enough to read or write. I was in daily therapy and taking new medication, but I felt certain it wouldn't work because I didn't think the problem was chemical. I thought the problem was me at my core. I was worthless, useless, hopeless, helpless. It was less and less each day. One night, my parents and I rented Harvey. Because it was adapted from a play, Harvey is, as I feared, a talky movie. Most of it takes place in only a few locations: the house Elwood P. Dowd shares with his older sister and his niece, the sanitarium where many believe Elwood belongs because of his best friend is an invisible rabbit, and the bar where Elwood likes to hang out and drink. Mary Chase's dialogue is magnificent throughout, but I especially love Elwood's soliloquies. Here is Elwood talking about chatting with strangers at the bar. They tell me about the big terrible things they've done, and the wonderful things they'll do, their hopes and their regrets, and their loves and their hates, all very large because nobody ever brings anything small into a bar. In another scene, Elwood tells his psychiatrist, "I've wrestled with reality for 35 years, doctor, and I'm happy to state I finally won out over it." Elwood is mentally ill, and he's not much of a contributor to society. It'd be easy to characterize him as worthless or hopeless, but he is also an extraordinary kind, even in difficult situations. At one point, his psychiatrist says, "This sister of yours is at the bottom of a conspiracy against you. She's trying to persuade me to lock you up. Today she had commitment papers drawn up. She has the power of attorney over you." Elwood replies, "My sister did all that in one afternoon? That Betta certainly is a whirlwind, isn't she?" Despite not being a traditional hero of any kind, Elwood is profoundly heroic. In my favorite line of the movie, he says, "Years ago, my mother used to say to me," she'd say, "in this world, you must be oh so smart or oh so pleasant." Well, for years I was smart. I recommend pleasant. December 2001, there was perhaps no human alive on earth who needed to hear those words more than I did. I don't believe in epiphanies. My blinding light awakenings have always proved fleeting. But I'll tell you this, I've never felt quite as hopeless since watching Harvey as I did just before I watched Harvey. A couple of months after watching it, I was able to return to Chicago and to book list. Although my recovery was halting and often precarious, I got better. It was probably the therapy and the medication, of course, but Elwood played his part. It showed me that you could be crazy and still be human, still be valuable, and still be loved. Elwood offered me a kind of hope that wasn't bullshit, and in doing so helped me to see that hope is the correct response to the strange, often terrifying miracle of consciousness. Hope is not easy or cheap. It is true. As Emily Dickinson put it, hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. I still sometimes stop hearing the tune. I still become enveloped by the abject pain of hopelessness. But hope is singing all the while. It's just that again and again and again, I must relearn how to listen. I hope you never find yourself on the floor of your kitchen. I hope you never cry in front of your boss, desperate with pain. But if you do, I hope they will give you some time off and tell you what Bill told me. Now more than ever, watch Harvey. I give Harvey 5 stars. I think that shall do it for the readings. There are. Go ahead. I know, I've been on this committee for a long time, and I've probably done maybe too many reviews. I don't know. I like doing them. So, and I love books, and this is a great place for books. Obviously, the library. I thank Samantha for bringing this book to the reading. I was going to do one that maybe I'll do it again next year. That's a good book as well. So any questions? I know, Sandy, you're going to have questions, aren't you? No. Yes, Francis.
This author is featured or as a young adult. Do you think young adults would enjoy these?
I think any sentient being should enjoy these essays. I mean, they are.
I just don't know children that well, so I just.
I think, obviously a 7-year-old, no, but an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, absolutely. I mean, I think they are.
They're ready for it.
They're really down to earth. He doesn't use gigantic words like Anthropocene. He's a wonderful guy. I mean, it's hard not to just like him immediately when you see him on the screen talking. And his, these essays are just like his podcast, as far as I can tell. They're very real and entertaining and educational, all of that. So, again, highly recommend. Any other observations, questions? Not a one? All right. All right, well, hopefully next week, what do we have? What's our,
I think Irene has a question.
Irene?
I-
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, Irene.
I had an observation.
An observation.
When I read this book with my daughter, I was surprised at how vulnerable he was able to put himself out there
Right.
with all of his vulnerability.
Right.
It just surprised me. I'd never read a book quite like that, that
Yeah.
was nonfiction.
Right, and Irene, if you can't hear in the back, she remarked how never read a book quite like this where someone is so vulnerable and puts himself out there and takes you with him on his personal journey, which is what it is. And the man has got a sharp eye on a lot of different facets of modern life. And modern life is difficult, there's no question about that. So. Yes, Sandy?
Maybe answering her question about young people reading this book, I could see where this could be made into comic books.
Oh, yeah, graphic novels.
I mean, the graphic comic books, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, then it would be a little bit more.
Yeah, that's, graphic novels are awesome. I love graphic novels. All right, well, any other questions, observations? No? All right. Well,